Hola? What's the weather like where you are today? Sunny, rainy, cloudy? Comment below.
It always starts with something small, harmless, almost comforting in its predictability, like the way my mom overdresses the salad, or the way she places the wine bottle just slightly out of my reach, as if she still thinks I might drink too much and say something inappropriate. The ritual is so familiar it could be a church service, only this one's flavored with passive aggression, veiled barbs, and those long, uncomfortable silences that aren't really silent at all. This dinner was no different. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, overcooked green beans that mom insists just need a little butter. And Lindsay, of course, brought her kale and quinoa side dish that nobody touches but everyone compliments. We sit there, the four of us, like poorly cast actors in a family sitcom that's long overstayed its welcome. Dad nods a lot, chews slowly, avoids eye contact. Lindsay's husband, Todd, isn't here. Work trip, though I'm half convinced he just knows better by now. I sit across from my sister, who's glowing again. She always glows. Her teeth practically shine when she talks, and somehow her hair looks better in this lighting than mine does even on my best day. She's talking about her kids, naturally, how Jeremy won the spelling bee, and how Clara is so advanced for her age that her preschool teacher says they might have to move her up a level. Mom eats it up like it's creme brulee. Dad nods again. I sip my water, and then Mom does it. She leans in, puts down her fork like she's about to drop wisdom from the mountaintop, and she says, "Lindsay, I honestly don't know how you do it all. You're the one we're proud of." The room doesn't go silent. Oh no, that would be too generous. It just hangs there, thick and sour, like old perfume clinging to drapes. Dad shifts in his chair. Lindsay blushes, shakes her head modestly, does that fake stop-it mom routine she's perfected over the years. I keep chewing my chicken. I don't flinch, I don't speak. But something inside me, some thin, neglected wire, snaps. She said things like that before, plenty of times, in different ways. You know, Lindsay has always had the drive. Or, you two are just so different, that's all, which is code for, you never quite measured up. But this time, felt like a nail being hammered into a coffin that had already been shut for years. I think what stunned me wasn't even the sentence itself, it was how effortlessly she said it. As if it were simply a known fact, like gravity, or that the sky is blue, that I wasn't someone to be proud of, and that everyone at the table already knew it. I nodded slowly, made a mental note of the wine bottle again, and instead reached for my water. "Anyone want help clearing?" I said it with a smile that felt like papier-mâché stretched over wet cement. I stood, started stacking plates, and Lindsay gave me a grateful look like I'd just offered to donate a kidney. "Thanks, Rach," she said, already halfway into another story about Clara's reading list. In the kitchen, I scraped mashed potatoes into the trash with a calmness that felt practiced. I rinsed, wiped, stacked. My mom hovered beside me at one point, drawing forks and humming like everything was perfectly fine. I didn't speak until the last plate was in the dishwasher. I turned to her then. I don't know what came over me, but the words were already forming before I could stop them. I leaned in close enough that my voice wouldn't carry to the dining room, and I said softly but clearly, "You know what, Mom? You can keep your pride. I've spent 40 years learning to live without it." Her face didn't change immediately, but I saw something flicker, like someone realizing too late they left the stove on. Then I smiled, wiped my hands on a towel, and said, "Thanks for dinner," like nothing had happened. I walked to the door, hugged Dad lightly, gave Lindsay a pat on the shoulder, and stepped outside into the cool night air without a single look back. There was something about that moment. Maybe it was the way the porch light buzzed like it was about to burn out, or the way the air smelled faintly of cut grass and gasoline, that made everything feel strangely final, like a chapter had just ended, and no one but me had noticed. I got home, kicked off my shoes, poured myself a glass of the good red wine I'd been saving, and sat in silence, phone on airplane mode, watching the condensation crawl down the side of the glass. I didn't feel angry, not exactly. More like Empty, but in a clean, clear way, like a shelf that's finally been dusted off. The next morning, my phone was vibrating before I even opened my eyes. Text after text, missed calls, Lindsay, Dad, even a message from one of my cousins, who I haven't talked to since last Thanksgiving. The one that stopped me cold was from Lindsay. It just said, "Mom's in tears and won't talk to anyone. What did you decide?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I put the phone down, took another sip of last night's wine, and smiled. Not because I'd hurt her, but because for once, she'd finally listened. There's something eerie about the way silence settles over you when everyone is trying to reach you at once. When your phone lights up with messages from people who usually forget your birthday, who don't call on holidays, who have never once asked you how you really are, but suddenly need to know exactly what you did to make your 71-year-old mother lock herself in her room like a scolded child. I didn't answer any of them, not out of malice or smugness, but because the truth, my truth, felt too sacred to be diluted by rushed explanations or misinterpreted through someone else's lens. I knew whatever I had said to Mom wasn't cruel. It wasn't screamed. It didn't come from a place of revenge. But that one sentence had peeled something open, something raw and infected that had been festering beneath our family's polished smiles and Midwestern table manners for decades. I spent that morning in a kind of strange, suspended quiet. No music, no TV, just me and my thoughts pacing circles inside the apartment. I made coffee I didn't drink, opened the fridge 4 times, and took nothing out. Stared at the wall like it might answer a question I hadn't dared to ask. The truth is, when you grow up as the child who doesn't get seen, not because you're bad, not because you failed, but because someone else is constantly glowing so bright they blind everyone in the room, you learn to live inside the shadows. You learn to play the part of the helper, the peacemaker, the one who folds towels without being asked, who offers to drive Grandma to the doctor when Lindsay is too busy with more important things, who remembers everyone's birthdays even when no one remembers yours. You become so good at shrinking that you forget what it feels like to take up space, until one day you say something that makes the walls crack, and then everyone's acting like you brought a hammer to Thanksgiving dinner. The silence didn't last long. Around 11, my phone rang again, this time with my brother-in-law's name lighting up the screen. Todd never calls me, not even when he and Lindsay are in town and need someone to dog sit, which I've done more times than I can count without so much as a thank you text. I let it go to voicemail at first, but he called again immediately after, and for some reason, I picked up the second time, maybe out of curiosity, or maybe just because I wanted to hear how the Golden Sisters' husband would try to guilt-trip the family disappointment. His voice was tight, clipped, polite in the way that always carries an edge. "Hey, Rachel, I'm calling because your mom's been really upset. Lindsay's freaking out. She says you said something to her, something that really hurt her." I leaned back in my chair, eyes tracing a crack in the ceiling I'd never noticed before, and I said very calmly, "I told her the truth, Todd. Something I should have said years ago." There was a pause on his end, like he wasn't sure what to do with that. Then he cleared his throat and mumbled something about how Mom's not eating and how she's just lying in bed crying, which I suppose is supposed to make me feel like the villain of the week. But all I felt was exhausted. Not from the guilt, because there wasn't any, but from the sheer weight of carrying so much unspoken resentment for so long, of being expected to stay quiet while everyone else got to be loud and loved and forgiven before they even apologized. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my couch and started thinking back, not just about what happened last night, but about everything that came before it. The endless stream of comparisons, the backhanded compliments, the way my mom always acted surprised whenever I actually did something well, like success from me was an accident instead of a possibility. I remembered being 14 and grounded for coming home late, even though I'd been out looking for Lindsay, who snuck out to meet some older guy she didn't want Mom to know about. I took the blame because she cried and said if Mom found out, she'd never trust her again. I remembered being 17 and turning down a scholarship to a school in Oregon because my mom said she didn't know how she'd manage without someone helping out around the house, now that Lindsay was finding herself on a gap year in Europe. And I remembered birthdays with store-bought cakes and a single card from Dad, while Lindsay got parties with matching napkins and elaborate themes, and a slideshow of her baby photos playing in the background. All those things had carved grooves into me, subtle and silent, until I didn't know how to stand upright without bending a little to make everyone else comfortable. But last night was different. Last night I didn't bend, I didn't yell either. I just told the truth in a voice so calm it probably scared her more than anything else I could have said. I told her I was done chasing her approval, like it was some kind of prize she kept just out of reach. And if that made her cry, maybe it was because she finally realized she couldn't keep ignoring what she never gave me. I thought about texting Lindsay back, just something short and sharp like, maybe ask Mom why hearing the truth hurt so much. But I didn't, not yet. Instead, I let the silence stretch a little longer because for the first time in years, it was finally on my terms. And maybe that was what scared them most of all. When she finally showed up at my door, I knew it was her before I even looked through the peephole. Not because she knocked in some special way, or because I could hear the distinctive rhythm of her footsteps through the hallway carpet, but because there's a particular kind of silence that follows Lindsay everywhere she goes when she's not in control of the story. A tense, hot, invisible fog that tells you someone's about to try and rewrite reality to better suit the version where they're still the hero. She knocked twice, then stood there, undoubtedly rehearsing her lines, probably thinking she could charm her way through this the same way she charmed her way out of every consequence since we were kids. But I didn't open the door right away, not because I wanted to assert some kind of power, but because I needed one more second to brace myself for the performance I knew was about to unfold in front of me. When I finally did open it, she was already halfway through an inhale, like she'd been practicing her opening sentence and didn't want to lose momentum. Her face was flushed, eyes wide, lips pressed into that half smile she used when she wanted to appear reasonable while absolutely seething inside. "Can we talk?" she said, without waiting for an answer, already stepping into my apartment like it was still some extension of the stage, where she plays the part of the dutiful daughter, the loving sister, the woman who has it all under control. I didn't stop her. I didn't offer coffee or small talk or a seat. I leaned against the wall near the kitchen and just watched her move like a storm cloud in heels, pacing in that frantic way she always did when something didn't go according to her script. "You really couldn't keep it together for one dinner?" she started, her voice sharp but just shy of yelling, the kind of tone you use when you're pretending not to be furious in public. "You had to make it about you? Do you have any idea what you did to Mom?" I stayed silent, not because I didn't have 1,000 things I could have said, but because I wanted her to fill the air first, wanted her to unravel herself without me giving her a single thread to blame it on. "She's devastated," she continued, pacing, hands flying. "She hasn't eaten. She won't come out of her room. Dad says she barely speaks. And for what? Because you needed to have some little meltdown over something that, honestly, wasn't even that big of a deal?" And there it was, the phrase I'd been waiting for, the one that always came when Lindsay needed to minimize someone else's pain in order to keep the spotlight fixed firmly on her own glowing image. Not that big of a deal. As if 40 years of being passed over, diminished, and strategically forgotten could be filed under mild inconvenience. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "Do you even remember what I gave up for you?" Her expression faltered for a second, a flicker of something unsteady passing through her perfectly mascaraed eyes, but it vanished just as quickly. "What are you talking about?" she snapped, arms crossed now, the classic Lindsay defense pose. "Everything I have, I worked for. Don't act like I took something from you." And that was when I realized she genuinely didn't know, or maybe she did once and just buried it so deep under years of selective memory and family praise that she forgot. I walked past her and opened the small box I keep at the back of my closet, the one filled with old acceptance letters. Letters of recommendation, things I never showed anyone because there never seemed to be a right time to bring up my could-have-beens. I pulled out the letter from the University of Oregon, full scholarship, housing included. An opportunity I never took because Mom sat me down one night, teary-eyed and overwhelmed, and told me she didn't know how she'd manage with Lindsay still finding herself and Dad working overtime. She never asked me not to go. She just painted the picture in such painstaking detail that it felt selfish to even consider leaving. I handed her the letter, let her read it in full, and when she finally looked up, her face had softened just enough for the truth to sink in. "You stayed?" she asked, like the idea itself was foreign. For me, I didn't nod. I didn't need to. Instead, I leaned in slightly and said, "You remember that night in '98, after your little party at Josh Dugan's house? The one where Mom found your bottle of vodka under my bed and you let her think it was mine?" Her face went still. For the first time in maybe ever, Lindsay had no script, no witty retort, no clever redirect. I didn't think you remembered that," she muttered, suddenly very interested in the pattern of my rug. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because watching her fumble in the face of a reality she thought she'd buried felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I didn't even know I'd lost. "That night," I said, my voice quiet but solid, "was when I decided I was done taking bullets for you. I just didn't say it out loud until now." I walked to the door, opened it, and gestured. She didn't move at first, just stood there, staring at me like she was waiting for a different ending. "I told Mom something she's needed to hear for a long time," I said as she stepped out. "I told her, you never loved me. You just needed me." Her hand paused on the doorknob, knuckles pale. She turned, eyes sharp with something between anger and guilt, and asked, "What do you want from us, Rachel? An apology, pity, a redo?" I laughed, soft, bitter, not cruel, and said, "No, I just want you to remember, that's all." I closed the door behind her gently, no slamming, no theatrics. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt the kind of silence that doesn't demand anything from you, doesn't suffocate you with the weight of unspoken things, just peace, cold, clean, and earned. There is a very particular weight that settles over everything when a family that thrives on appearances begins to unravel in silence, not in the way of screaming matches or dramatic confrontations you might see in some movie, but in the quieter, far more corrosive way, where nobody calls, nobody texts, and everyone pretends that the absence of communication is somehow more respectful than the presence of hard truths. For 72 hours, I didn't hear a word from anyone in my family, not a single ping from Lindsay, no hesitant attempts from my mother, and even my father, who has perfected the art of cowardly neutrality, remained an invisible ghost in a household where he's long since learned that saying less means being liked more. At first, the silence felt like a gift, a strange and welcome reprieve from the constant obligation of performing politeness, from swallowing every thought that might make someone else uncomfortable just to maintain peace that only benefited them. I cooked meals for one with music playing low in the background, drank coffee on my balcony while the sun painted light across the buildings, and allowed myself the space to breathe without preparing for the next emotional ambush disguised as a loving conversation. But as the second day bled into the third, I could feel the tension creeping back in, not because I regretted what I said, but because I began to sense, with growing clarity, that the silence wasn't simply a result of shock or pain. It was a strategy. Families like mine don't fall apart when someone lies. They unravel when someone finally tells the truth. And now that I had placed the truth on the table like a raw, uncut stone, no one could ignore or reshape. Everyone was scrambling in their own way to figure out how to make it go away without ever addressing it directly. That's when my phone rang. Unexpected, jarring in the quiet of my apartment, and I saw my father's name on the screen. His name so rarely attached to any active role in family dynamics that I almost didn't answer, half expecting it to be a pocket dial or a mispress. But I picked up, curious and calm, and after a beat of awkward breathing on his end, he spoke in a voice that was lower than usual, as if he were calling me from a confessional booth rather than his own house. "Your mom isn't doing well," he said, with that practiced mix of concern and avoidance that he's used my entire life. "She hasn't eaten much. She's just lying in bed, not really talking." I waited, giving him space to say whatever he had come to say, knowing full well that his intention was not to understand or support me, but to enlist me in fixing something I didn't break. When the silence between us stretched too long for his comfort, he added, "I think maybe if you just called her, said something, I don't know, it might help." There was something deeply ironic in the idea that after all these years of being made to feel invisible, it was now somehow my responsibility to soothe the very woman who had spent a lifetime reminding me, subtly and overtly, that I was less accomplished, less lovable, less worthy of pride. I almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but because of how absurdly predictable it all was. My mother had spent decades shaping the family narrative around Lindsay, building her up into this gleaming emblem of success and goodness, while I had been reduced to the convenient backdrop, the older sister who could always be relied on to clean up, calm down, and stay quiet. "I think she just needs time," I said slowly, choosing every word like it might be carved into stone. "Time to think about the things she's always chosen not to see." My father sighed, the kind of sigh that speaks volumes without saying anything at all, and mumbled, "All right, just let me know if you change your mind," before ending the call with a click that sounded final, even though it never is. I didn't call her. Instead, I did something I should have done a long time ago. I wrote her a letter, not a dramatic manifesto or a bleeding heart confessional, but a list. A simple, factual list written in ink on heavy paper, folded neatly and slipped into an envelope without a return address, as if even the paper itself knew I wasn't expecting a reply. The letter contained the years, the dates, and the moments. It said, "When Lindsay got suspended in 10th grade and you told people it was me, I stayed silent. When you forgot my college graduation because Lindsay had the flu, I said it was fine. When I watched you beam at her wedding and couldn't find a single photo of you smiling like that at mine, I swallowed the lump in my throat and told everyone how beautiful the day was. When I drove you to chemo and waited in parking lots for hours because Lindsay was too busy, you told people she never left your side." And at the end of that list, beneath the final line, I wrote the only thing that mattered anymore. I never wanted to be better than her. I just wanted you to see me. I dropped it in their mailbox late at night without fanfare or theatrics. Just a quiet offering of truth wrapped in the kind of dignity I knew they would never fully appreciate. 3 days turned to 4, and then, without warning, something arrived in return. A letter, no name, no handwriting I recognized immediately, just an envelope slipped under my door in the early morning hours, as if someone wanted to return the gesture but couldn't bear to face me while doing it. In that tan, tucked between old, faded photographs, was a single torn page from a diary I hadn't seen since I was 10 years old, a page I didn't even remember writing until I read the words in my own childish scrawl. "I hope one day Mommy smiles at me like she smiles at Lindsay." And beneath that, in different ink, clearly written recently, was a single line in my mother's handwriting. "You always were good enough. I just didn't know how to show it." I stared at the words for a long time, not crying, not feeling any particular rush of relief or forgiveness, but simply absorbing the strange, hollow feeling of someone finally saying something that might have mattered had it come 20 or 30 years sooner. I folded the page slowly, walked it to the kitchen, and burned it in the sink. Not out of rage or hatred, but because some wounds, once exposed, need more than apologies to heal. They need time, they need space, and sometimes they need to be let go in order to stop spreading rot. As the paper turned to ash and curled into nothing, I felt something settle inside me, not peace exactly, but clarity. Sometimes silence is the answer, not because it's right, but because it's all that's left. There is a kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful or restorative, not the silence of early morning coffee or of books read beside a window on a rainy day, but a heavier kind of hush. The kind that settles deep in your bones when you realize that whatever you were waiting for, an apology, an explanation, some gesture that might stitch back what's been frayed for too long, has finally arrived, only to reveal that even truth, once uncovered, can feel both too late and not quite enough. The envelope arrived early, slid under my door like some clandestine offering from a ghost, trying to write itself back into the story. It didn't have a return address, but I didn't need one. The weight of it was unmistakably hers, not in heft, but in energy, in that unmistakable blend of guilt and control that had defined so many of her gestures over the years. When I picked it up, I held it for a long moment before opening it, letting my fingers trace the edges of the paper, as if they might tell me what kind of narrative I was about to be handed. Because in our family, words have never just been words. They've always been weapons, gifts, or bargains dressed up in sentiment, always meant to sway or correct or redeem. Inside the envelope, there were 3 items, each more carefully curated than the last. First, a handful of photos, some of which I'd never seen before, all of them featuring me at various ages, always in the background, always in proximity to Lindsay, but rarely alone, rarely centered. There was one from a Christmas morning when I was maybe 9, holding a doll I'd long forgotten, eyes wide with that fleeting hope you only get before the world teaches you not to expect too much. There was another of me standing in the rain at Lindsay's soccer game. No umbrella, just a poncho and a half-hearted smile while she ran the field, triumphant and loud. Then folded in thirds and tucked behind the photos was the page that stopped my breath. It was from a diary I'd kept for only a few months when I was 10. The cover long lost to attic dust and time. The paper was thin, yellowed with age, the ink slightly smudged, but my handwriting was unmistakable, big rounded letters with uneven lines. The scrawl of a little girl who had too many thoughts and no real audience for any of them. The entry was simple, just one sentence really. I hope one day Mommy smiles at me like she smiles at Lindsay. Reading it didn't break me. It didn't bring tears or rage or anything as cinematic as that. Instead, it just hollowed something out that had already been emptied a long time ago and simply reminded me of the echo. Below the child's confession, written in neater, more practiced handwriting that could only be hers, were the words I never thought I'd see. You always were good enough. I just didn't know how to show it. And there it was, the closest thing to a confession my mother was ever going to make, delivered not face to face, not with trembling hands and watery eyes, but through ink and implication, as though putting it on paper allowed her to admit it without having to live in the discomfort of saying it out loud. There was a part of me, a small and tired part, that wanted to hold on to that page, like proof that maybe everything I remembered wasn't imagined, that maybe the little girl who learned to be quiet so her sister could shine hadn't been entirely forgotten after all. But that part of me wasn't in charge anymore. I took the letter, the photos, the fragile remains of a story I never volunteered to star in, and I walked them to the kitchen. I didn't hesitate. I didn't dramatize it. I simply turned on the burner, lit a match, and watched them burn, slowly, quietly, until the last edge of the last word curled inward and turned to black. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of clarity. I didn't need her guilt. I didn't need her half-formed apology scrawled beneath a child's forgotten hope. What I needed, what I had always needed, was to be seen in the moment when it mattered, not decades later through the safety of reflection. Afterward, I left the apartment. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't answer the phone when Lindsay called one more time that afternoon. I walked to a small bar near the edge of the neighborhood, the kind where nobody knows your name and everyone minds their business, and I sat there with a glass of wine and the kind of stillness that comes only after you finally stop trying to rewrite history. A friend joined me, someone who didn't ask questions, someone who simply understood the language of silence, and for the first time in what felt like years, I laughed. Not because something was funny, but because I finally felt the tension slip from my shoulders in a way that didn't demand performance or explanation. And as we sat there, with the sun slipping behind the buildings and the noise of the world just far enough away to feel safe, I realized something important, something I hadn't let myself believe until now. Forgiveness, at least the kind I needed, was never going to come from the people who hurt me. It wasn't going to come in a letter or a phone call or some epiphany delivered years after the fact. Forgiveness, for me, had to come from letting go of the need for them to understand, from releasing the belief that one day they'd wake up and see everything they missed. I didn't break my mother. I didn't shatter some delicate thing she had built. What I broke was the silence, the obedient, complicit silence that had kept me invisible for most of my life. And the thing about silence is once it's gone, once it's filled with truth that can't be ignored or softened or spun into something more palatable, it becomes impossible to return to the world that existed before it. The final thing I did before leaving that bar was open the group chat my family uses to share photos and updates and obligatory holiday messages. I scrolled past the messages I'd ignored over the past few days, pictures of Lindsay's kids, another generic, "hope you're all doing okay" from Dad, and then, without ceremony, I deleted it. Maybe one day I'll talk to them again. Maybe I won't. That's the kind of ending real life offers. Not clean or clear, but filled with the kind of uncertainty that makes room for both peace and distance. And maybe, just maybe, that's all I ever needed in the first place. Not to be right, not even to be loved the same, just to be free.